Welcome back to a numbers game with Brian Girdusky. Thank you guys for being here again. Happy Monday, start of the new week. I wanted to give a brief update of video footage that aired on Friday, late Friday. It came out. It is the cell phone footage from the federal agent who was involved in the shooting in Minneapolis. So I want to start the program off by actually showing the footage, the video from the federal agent. It's not very long, but here goes. This is the video footage that the agent took from his perspective.
Change our plates every morning, just so you know. It'll be the same plate when you come talk to us later. That's fine. U.S. citizen, former fucking veteran. You want to come at us? You want to come at us? I say go get yourself some lunch, big boy. Go ahead.
Out of the car. Get out of the fucking car. Get out of the car.
Whoa!
So very upsetting video to watch it from that perspective. There's a lot of things to really just go over. One, the chatter online that they didn't know that the women did not know who the men were because they were masked and in unmarked cars is clearly a lie. They very clearly knew that these were ICE agents, that they were federal officers, and that they were there to hold them up or kind of disturb their actions, which is a federal crime. They were there to commit a crime. Also, it's very clear that the wife of Renee Gold had military experience because the ICE agent is using his camera to take footage of the car to use in a case in a future arrest. Like he's planning to arrest her. And that seems like very clearly the motive, which is why you'd want to get a full view of the car. And she knows this. This is why she's saying she knows what's going on. She's not dumb, the wife. She's very clearly understanding the situation. One, there's a very clear understanding. These are ICE agents. They know that they're committing a crime. They know they're holding them up. They know the ICE agents are collecting evidence for a future arrest. That's why she says you're here to talk to them later. She's agitating them. Notice that the wife is the only one not on the sidewalk of all the other protesters and people assembled there. So she's very clearly there to confront them and be in their face, right? There's no ifs, ands, or buts about that. Now, my guest on Friday, Marina Medved, who's a trial attorney, experienced trial attorney, she made the mistake of saying that the officer was not in the front of the car. Now, the officer clearly did make a tactical decision. That was probably a mistake by moving to the front of the car. He should have stayed in the rear of the car. However, my guess is that he did not approach the car in an effort to sit there and get her out of the car. He was there to take a video evidence to sit there and try to say, this is what's going on in the future of an arrest. The two women, Renee, the one who was killed, were having an antagonistic conversation, but it wasn't overly hostile, right? They're not throwing the F-bombs at each other. I mean, you can hear her say, big boy, say, go to lunch, but they weren't there to drop a child off from school, right? This is another case that liberals are making, that they were just there to drop a child from school. They were in the neighborhood and they get stuck in this bad position with these masked agents that they don't know who they are. That didn't happen either, right? They're they're clearly there. And although it's not overly hostile, it comes at a surprise to the agent. Now, the collision with the officer is head on, right? It's not, and it's completely caught him by surprise. When she makes the decision to accelerate the vehicle, you hear him say, whoa. The driver also, this is a very important part if you haven't seen the video, the driver looks at the officer, smiles, then changes gear, spins the steering wheel to her right and hits the gas. So she makes eye contact. She's very aware of where the officer is at the time she accelerates the vehicle. I think that's something very important. The driver's eye contact with the officer, I think, will become an important piece of evidence going forward. It's not like she didn't know, who was in front of her and lost in the moment. She knew he was in front of him. Now, the way that she moves the steering wheel is against him. So she probably it's very likely she wasn't aiming to mow him down. But given that he was only standing 2 to 3 feet from her, and there are other agents holding onto the vehicle at the time, it seems almost an impossibility that she wouldn't hit him, right? She does gun it. I mean, she only has to gun it for a minute. It doesn't, or for a second rather. She doesn't have to go very, very fast, but she does gun it. And given how close he was to the car, it seems impossible that she wouldn't hit him, which she did through all the evidence. Now, we also don't know in that moment if we saw the cop saw the steering wheel move any which way. But that doesn't really matter so much so as it doesn't matter so much if he saw which way the steering wheel was moving as much as he saw her make eye contact with him and the car accelerate. This also ends the narrative that has been online and through the liberal media that she had heard multiple commands. There's very clearly a singular command, which is get out of the car. She should have listened. I contacted Maria Medved, the senior trial attorney, today and asked her a few quick questions, namely about the wife. In my opinion, the wife saying, drive, baby, drive is the sole command that she listens to, the one to impede authorities and to, not listen to federal authorities. She's clearing telling her evade arrest, which is also a crime. And it is the bad decision that ultimately gets her killed. Marina told me, she said I asked her, would she be charged? And she said she would have to be charged under local or state law. And the DA in Minneapolis is a George Soros appointed DA who probably will not bring any charges against her. And she said even a conservative DA would have a very difficult time bringing charges against her because they can't really get a conviction. In my opinion, a Soros-backed DA would absolutely bring charges to a right-winger who was making that command, if not to get a conviction, but to make their life miserable. That's just my opinion. I asked also Marina what is likely to happen next. She said the Hennepin County is where Minneapolis is located. The Hennepin County DA, whose campaign was funded by Soros, is going to open her own investigation into the use of deadly force by a federal agent against Renee Nicole Good. The Minnesota use of deadly force law is on the right. She's basically looking to see if she can argue that the shooting was inconsistent with this law. The federal government is conducting its own investigation and based on statements from the administration is very unlikely to charge the officer. Since the federal government elected not to share evidence with the county, the DA has to rely on evidence and whatever else she can get her hands on, except a homicide case would need the vehicle and firearm evidence, Renee's body statement from the witness, yada, yada, yada. So it makes it a little bit more difficult for the DA to get the conviction, given that most of the evidence is in federal hands. We'll have to wait and see. I'm going to ask my audience something that I should have asked on Friday, and it didn't cross my mind until I was seeing her so up close and seeing the last seconds of this woman's life. And I'm going to ask everyone, especially if they are a religious person, to pray for the repose of her soul and that she is in peace with her creator. I think that that's an important thing that we could do in this moment and bring a little humanity to this woman's life that has been lost. I do think that she made series of fatal errors, from protesting ICE to committing the crime of trying to impede their work, to trying to evade arrest, to listening to her wife and gunning it. I don't see necessarily evidence that she was purposely mowing down, although she did hit him, but she made every other error you could possibly make. I don't think it's the officer's fault. He doesn't know her intention at that time. I think that it's a series of bad accidents, and we're all looking, and the left especially right now saying, oh, we should blame ICE agents. It's ICE agents' fault. It is not ICE agents' fault. It is not. This is the fault of generational decisions by our elected leaders, namely the presidents, to ignore immigration law for decades. And the American people had enough. We want our laws followed. It is not right that American citizens are held to one standard and illegal aliens who break into our country are held to a different standard. They should be held to the same standard, the same law and order that we are held in. And if you are in this country illegally, you should be deported. I don't care if you were here 1 week, 1 month, 1 year, 10 years, or 20 years. The longer you have been here, the longer you've spit in the face of our law enforcement. It is in our laws. And probably take it from our welfare system and enjoy the riches of America without ever having done the right thing. It is not the fault of all ICE to enforce the law. Like it's not the fault of the police to enforce the law. They are there to enforce the law. And this man did not have no experience and no training. That is a lie that the left is telling right now. He had a decade on the job. He did basically everything in the moment right. And there was a lot of bad circumstances. The left is lost its mind with anger right now. And their decision to treat our ICE agents as Gestapo or as Nazis or anything else they've said is despicable and it is a lie. And all that being said, we shouldn't lose the moment that lose the idea and the understanding that this is a person who had a soul and is in their great rest. And we should pray for the repose of that soul, that it is in peace. That is my feelings about it. I will give you guys an update as more information comes out about this case. If they do make a local prosecution, I might have on some lawyers to sit there and discuss it. I'll let you guys know. It's deeply upsetting. The whole thing's deeply upsetting. Our immigration laws have to be carried out. There's no ifs, ands, or buts about it. And hopefully people do not try to impede ICE agents. That is the lesson here. Don't sit there and try to stop ICE agents from doing their job. It's my opinion. Anyway, I have other data coming out about a completely different story. Not not happy, but interesting and fascinating. And I have that coming up with you guys next. So, the Nonpartisan Congressional Budget Office put out a new report that they estimate that 2030 will be the year that we go into net negative population growth. That means that there will be more deaths than births for the first time ever. They continue to project that we will continue to snowball a declining population, a declining fertility rate. And as baby boomers age and start to die off, that will lead us into a net negative population growth. Now, I've spoken about demographics a number of times on this podcast because I think that it's interesting and underspoken about and really is immensely important for their future, but doesn't get the attention it deserves because it's a little uncomfortable and people kind of act like the future is so far off when it is just a few years away. Let's get some numbers on the board first. For a country to maintain a consistent population at replacement level, one generation could equally replace another generation. You need 2.1 children per woman. Now, they measure per woman, not per man. So when someone like Clint Eastwood, who I love, but I'm giving him as a good example, Clint Eastwood has 8 children with 6 different women. He actually has a low fertility rate because most women did not have more than one child with any other man. So he actually lowers the fertility rate below 2.1, even though he has a lot of children. He's fathered a lot of children. Now, if you want to have a large family, if you want to have 2 or more children, it is important to have them with one single woman rather than a whole flock of different women. That is the important hot take from there. Okay, the last time that America had a fertility rate at replacement levels was 2007. It had fallen off in the early 70s before picking back up again and then tanking. The reason it tanked since 2007 is a number of cases. One, teen pregnancies basically became extinct, right? Teen pregnancies when I was growing up in the 90s was, the show on Maury all the time and Jerry Springer, and it was a big, big deal. There was Lifetime movies about girls who make promises that they and their best friends as teenagers would all become pregnant together. That basically came to a grinding halt. Secondly, Latinos, as they assimilated into a first world society, their birth rates dropped. Latinos used to have these big, big families. It was, kind of a trope that a Mexican would have 4 or 5 children. That doesn't exist anymore as the rule. It's an exception, but it's not the rule. And then lastly, the Black birth rate, which was always very high in connection in part because of teen pregnancy, also plummeted and it fell substantially lower. Now, since then, things have only gotten worse in terms of keeping a birth rate around replacement levels. Latino birth rate picked up pretty significantly under Joe Biden. That's because he accepted millions of illegal aliens into the country and incentivized them to have children so they can get birthright citizenship. But that number has already started to decline, believe it or not, even since Biden's just 1 year out of office. The other reason is that Asians are a bigger part of our immigration pool. Asians have some of the lowest fertility levels in the entire world, as well as in our own country. All different Asian groups have very, very low fertility levels. And then lastly is the Black birth rate. As Black women have gone to college and graduated college is a huge delayer for many people to sit there and to have children. Black women have very few children now. In fact, they have much fewer children than white women do for the first time ever. In 2025, the U.S. reported 3,011,262 births. It's down 16,000 from the year prior. In the late 1950s, there were 4.3 million births. So think of all the immigrants we've taken in. We're still having 1.3 million fewer births than we did in the 1950s during the baby boom. The overall fertility rate stood at 1.59 children per woman. Now, remember, I said you need 2.1. So 1.59, almost 1.6, that's much lower. We are well below replacement levels. Last year, the only developed country in the Western world to have a fertility rate above replacement levels was Israel at 2.87. So Israel is growing, but they are the only ones to be growing in the entire Western world. Every other country in the entire West has too few children to maintain society as it functions. It is shrinking. I want to demonstrate what that looks like in real terms. If you take a 1.6 uh, fertility level, 1.6 children per woman, which is about what America has, and you reduce it just down to 100 people, it means those 100 people will have 80 children, and those 80 children will have 64 grandchildren. That's a much smaller future than where it started at the 100. It's an incredible shrinkage in just 2 generations, and it spells real trouble for our welfare state, especially in one. I mean, that's the first thing that comes to my mind is our Social Security and Medicare, and how we keep seniors out of poverty, which are those kinds of government programs. The CBO estimates that by 2056, there'll be 2.2 workers for every retiree. That is unsustainable in all its current forms. But only if fertility rates stay at 1.5 children per woman, which is what the CBO is estimating. The CBO is saying we're at 1.6, 1.59, 1.6. American fertility rate is going to drop to 1.5 and stay there. And they believe that foreign-born women will drop from 1.8 to 1.66, and it will stay there. They think the floor is going to hit in 2032. That is ludicrous thinking on the part of the CBO. That is not true at all. The most important thing to understand about declining fertility rates, and this is what we've seen throughout Europe and South America and East Asia, is that there is no floor. There's no limits to how low this can go. Europe has had bad fertility rates for decades. I'm talking the 1960s and some places the 1950s. Many parts of the continent are already seeing shrinking populations. The only countries in all of Europe to have a fertility rate higher than America's 1.59 is Moldova, Bulgaria, Croatia, Montenegro, and Kosovo. That is it. Many countries are below 1.3, like Italy, Austria, Switzerland, Portugal, Malta, Spain, Greece. All of those countries, that is a third of what you need. I mean, that means the grandchildren population is going to be a third of what the original population is. That is mass population loss in peacetime, mass population loss. And when you considered Europe's problem has been around for a long time, but other countries have actually sunk way below Europe's numbers. Latin America hit European levels in 2025. Cuba, Costa Rica, Colombia, Argentina, and Uruguay are below the norms of what Europe is. And actually Mexico, which used to have tons of kids, which produced a working class that came to America, they're close to that. Mexico is, I think, at 1.38. They're very close to being at a third of the level of what you need to be to hit the grandchildren will be a third the population size. In Asia, it's below South America. South Korea, Taiwan, China, Hong Kong, Thailand, Singapore, all reported less than 1 child per woman. China is losing on average of 1.4 million people per year. Kindergartens are being hollowed out of China. The population is going to lose over 800 million people over the next 75 years. 800 million people. Many parts of Africa by the end of this century will have larger populations or equal populations to China at the rate that they're currently going. The CBO also estimates that the U.S. net population growth from immigration this year is about 400,000, given the increased deportations. That's a fairly dramatic difference in earlier years, especially under Joe Biden, but that says that the original estimates that we're experiencing population loss because of Trump's immigration efforts was inaccurate. We'll see the final numbers with the census that come out. I don't know if that's going to be end up being true or not, but I just was worth putting that out. Anyway, back to the fertility rate stuff. So the idea that America will stop at 1.5 and foreigners at 1.66 is ludicrous. There is no bottom. It will continue to go down. It could very well continue to go down to European levels, to South American levels, or even to Asian levels. Who is having children in America today? Who are the ones considering everything is working against starting a family? Namely conservative and religious people. A general social survey found that 47% of conservative men between the ages of 25 to 35 have children, and 71% of conservative women in the same age have children. My guess is the difference, that big difference between 71 and 47, is that women marry older than men do. Typically, it's much more common that a 30-year-old woman will be married to a 35 to 40-year-old man than vice versa, and that's where that number comes from. But anyway, I'm not pointing, by the way, I just want to make this one thing clear because I get emails about this. I'm not pointing fingers and saying you should feel bad if you are either young and you want to have kids, but you're not in a position to, either financially or medically, or you haven't found a partner yet, or you are older and just never did. I'm not here to shame or make anyone feel guilty. Life is very tough. Bad things happen, or things that are unfortunate happen, or decisions are made. And I believe if you don't want to have children, you shouldn't. I want to make that perfectly clear at the very beginning. But another conversation that is not happening has to happen. And this is towards my older listeners, or my listener. I don't like to say older. My listeners of a certain age. It's a nice way to say it. Listeners of a certain age, and the idea of legacy, right? It's a conversation I have tried very unsuccessfully to have in my own family. Life for younger people is much more difficult than it was 50 or 60 years ago. It just is. I mean, intact families of aunts and grandmothers who can watch children aren't there. Housing is very expensive. Employment is chaotic and less consistent. And honestly, it's very difficult for a lot of young people to find the life partner who is on the same track as far as family and values and religion goes. Those are big, big parts of it. And big parts of who you're looking for to start a family with. And if you're a person of a certain age, let's say 55 or older, and you have young adult children, right? Or adult children who are in their maybe mid 20s. I think it's time for that generation of Gen Xers, maybe younger baby boomers, to really take it upon themselves to think, how can they help establish their children and get them to a place that getting married is accessible? We can't just depend on government action. We can't just depend on, this thing or that thing happening, or new technologies to show up. We really need to depend on ourselves, each other, and our tribe, our inner tribe, whether that be our family members or what. And you need to think about, what kind of conversations are you having that you have a legacy? I have a lot of female cousins who are entering into their mid to late 20s. And I've basically told them, you need to be dating for marriage, right? And I say that not as somebody who's scolding them. I'm saying that as somebody who is in my late 30s. I have a lot of friends who spent a decade kind of doing ungats. Like they didn't date for marriage. They dated just to date, just because I think they thought that that's what they had to do at the moment. And instead of asking if a man was going to be a good father, which is the question, they were asking, am I having a good time? Is he treat me right? Yada, yada, yada. I think the good father question should have been a much larger one on the periphery, on the horizon, than I think that a lot of people put it, as far as order of what was important to them. It's difficult. But to that older audience, or to that audience of a certain age who are in their 50s maybe, I think that you need to understand, becoming a grandparent can't be taken for granted. Last November, the New York Times had a really heartbreaking piece called "The Unspoken Grief of Never Becoming a Grandparent," detailing how many older Americans are never going to get that chance, right? Either their children didn't have those values, or wasn't imposed on those values of legacy and family. And this is our lineage, and you are a very important chink in that chain. You are important to keep this family lineage going. You are essential to it. And a lot of older Americans, describe feelings of depression and anxiety because of that, because they expected their children to be able to carry that on, and they didn't. You, as someone who is established, you, of someone of a certain age, need to be thinking about how can I secure a legacy for my family happens, a lineage is carried on. How do I make sure if my kids are younger, even in their teens, how that and impose on them that this is very important for us to sit there and to make sure we have children, to make sure we have another generation. It's important as a country. It's important in our micro families. It's important to us as people. We are meant to continue on generation to generation. It is part of our values, especially as conservatives, to continue that on. And unless we really make an effort to sit there and say, yes, there are times having kids is exhausting, that is inconvenient. You don't get to go on vacations. You pause. I don't say you end. You pause part of your life that you get to live on in your 50s and 60s. You pause that for a moment to have children, to raise them, to give them values, to make sure they go through school and everything. But if we don't do that, our demographics will only continue to nosedive. And as much as young people are having that conversation within themselves, whether they're taking it very seriously or not so seriously, I think older Americans, Americans of a certain age, people of 45 above, 50 and above, 55 and above, need to be having that conversation of how do I make it possible in any way that I can, whether it be promising babysitting, promising moving closer to my adult children, helping out in any which way I possibly can to guarantee, or helping out financially if you have those resources, helping out to make sure that you can have grandchildren. The idea of legacy should not be taken for granted. The idea of children should not be taken for grandchildren, and grandchildren should be taken for granted. And it's extremely important. And the CBO numbers are very scary. We are going to enter net negative growth in a very, very short period of time. And it is our responsibility as individuals to make sure that that doesn't happen. Ask Me Anything is coming up next. Hope you guys stay tuned. This is the Ask Me Anything segment. I love this segment. If you guys want to be part of the Ask Me Anything segment, email me, Ryan at numbersgamepodcast.com. That's Ryan at numbers, plural, gamepodcast.com. It's very exciting. This question comes from Frank. He says, I can't remember if you covered this, but I was wondering if NYC mayoral election were to held on the same cycle and timing as the presidential election, could Mamdani have still won? Also, I thought I heard something about New York City considering moving to the elections to coincide with the presidential elections. Would that ever happen? And if so, would it do anything to weed out some of the terrible candidates? Thanks. I love the show. Thanks, Frank. I love you for listening to the show. This is a great question. So Kathy Hochul tried to move local elections to presidential years. It was a vote by the people, and the people voted it down. So no, I don't think it's going to happen. Her efforts, I think, were to sit there and make sure that less progressive candidates got the vote, because in primaries, it would have been presidential primary turnout, which wouldn't have been good for progressives, but the people did vote against that. Secondly, would Mamdani have still won? I think that the question is how many people did, and this is the way I approach it, how many people voted in 2024 that didn't vote in 2025? So in the New York City mayoral election in 2024, 2,194,204 people voted. Compared to the presidential election, when 2,794,960 people voted. 600,000 people did not vote that had voted in the previous year's election. Cuomo lost by 207,000 votes. That means for him to have won, he would have had to capture 2/3 of the people who would have voted because they voted in 2024, but they didn't vote in 2025. So let's say all 600 of those people voted. He would have had to win 2/3 of those votes. That seems unlikely. Now, most missing votes didn't come out of most of the missing votes did come out of Cuomo's better counties, Staten Island, which he won, and Queens and the Bronx, which he didn't win, but he did much better than Manhattan and Brooklyn. Given that Trump being on the ballot could have turned out more Republicans and less hardcore progressive Democrats, he would still have to win an enormous amount. Remember, he's splitting the Republican vote with Curtis Lewa. So all those voters are not going to him because Curtis is there. He's going to get 8% of those votes or 10% of those votes. It's very likely instead of 2/3, he probably would have needed 3/4 of those votes. It's almost impossible at that point. The only case I could see of him winning, if we're going to sit there and change all the rules and who showed up or whatever, is if they were held in a presidential election and Curtis didn't win and dropped out. If Curtis would have dropped out and Cuomo would have had the nomination, the endorsement of Curtis, and they had presidential turnout, which is a lot of ifs. It's kind of ridiculous to even say that sentence out loud. But if all those things happen, yeah, I think Cuomo could have won. I think if there was just the presidential turnout and Curtis was still on the ballot, I think he would have won Queens County, which he only lost by 33,000 votes. And there was 160,000 people who had voted in the presidential there and not voted in the mayoral. And he would have gotten much closer to the Bronx. He lost the Bronx by 27,000 votes, and there was 130,000 who had stayed home from the previous election. He would have made those two much more competitive. I think he would have definitely won Queens. The Bronx is it would have been a jump ball. But even if he would have won by a vote or two votes, it wouldn't have been enough to actually win the election. So no, Cuomo wouldn't have won under any of those circumstances. The big problem for Cuomo is he won a lot of Hispanics and Black voters in the primary. He did not go on to win them in the general because they voted consistently down the Democratic Party line. He could have won with the voters that he had without counting new voters if he would just carried the precincts that he had carried in the primary. If he would have carried the Bronx and carried the Black parts of Brooklyn and Queens, he would have won. But they abandoned him for the Democrat. So that's how the cookie crumbled. Thank you guys for being with me. If you like this podcast, please like and subscribe on the iHeartRadio app, Apple Podcasts, where we get your podcasts, and please subscribe on YouTube. I'm over 1,700. I'm trying to get to 4,000 next few months. Hope you guys will be part of that. Please like and subscribe. I will see you guys on Wednesday.